And we'll kick off. So, Kyle, I'll hand over to you. Please feel free to grab the screen if you have any slides you wish to share.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting me, and good morning to everyone on the other side of the world. It's Halloween here, and so we're about to have some trick-or-treaters come by in about an hour and a half. So I'm looking forward to that. But I'm just going to share my slides, and I'm hoping someone can confirm when you see them. Oh,
We can't quite see them yet, but bear with us.
yeah, there's some strange orange box I've never seen before. Can you still hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly.
Oh, it says Zoom quit unexpectedly, but I'm still here. That's good.
Oh, and here come your slides. I think we've got OpenAlex and Open Index of the global research ecosystem just come up on screen, looking good.
Okay, great. So yes, thanks again, everyone, for having me. I do have some slides.
Oh no, perhaps that was the Zoom quit unexpectedly catching up.
Yeah, I can still
Oh
see.
no.
I can still see Kyle though on screen.
Yeah, I think that's what that was,
Oh wait,
catching up.
here we go. We've got you back.
Oh,
Let's
it's
try
not a
this
Zoom
again.
meeting unless there's at least one random technical glitch.
There has to be, it's a feature.
Yeah. Okay, slides seem to have appeared again. It's looking good. Should we try Mark 2?
Okay, let's try it again. Um, so I do have a few slides, and I'm going to go through these, and then afterwards, sort of an interactive Q&A. I do want to encourage everyone to put questions in the chat if that's helpful. Then we can address them in the Q&A. I can also bring it up if it's really relevant while I'm speaking. Just a quick high level of what I'm hoping to present about for a few minutes. Introducing OpenAlex for those of you who haven't heard of it, why you should use it, how you can use it, and how others are using it. And then again, interactive Q&A demo. At a really high level, we think of research intelligence as collecting data on research activities to provide insights or intelligence and then make better decisions. And we think of that as broadly as finding the right paper in a sea of 10 million publications a year, or some of the large, finding collaborators or evaluating research at the global scale. So everything in between. The problem with research intelligence is unlike every other sector in the world, institutions don't have even an inventory of their work. Every other business has sort of an inventory of their assets, and then they're able to do really cool analytics based on that. We don't have that in universities because when a faculty member is publishing, they don't need their manager's approval. And that's a really important part of science, that the department isn't deciding what gets published. But then publishers never have to tell the university what they published. So this is the biggest problem with research intelligence is you don't have information on your own research or others. Knowledge graphs, if you haven't heard this term before, help solve that problem. Basically, for a work or a publication, we bring all sorts of information about it, like who published it, where they were at, what it is on, who funded it, topics, authors, etc. Okay, if you haven't heard that term SKG before, you've probably heard of a few of them. So for instance, Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar is a little bit different because you can't quite use it the exact same way as you can other knowledge graphs. But Microsoft Academic Graph, Dimensions, and today I'm talking about OpenAlex. We like to say we're big, open, and easy, but there's a few points I want to make within that. So the first is that we have broader coverage than any other SKG. If you go to our website, there is a coverage comparison of most of the major established products, but a few recent studies I want to point out. In the last 15 years or so, there's been a lot of studies that compare Web of Science to Scopus. OpenAlex is pretty new. It's only the last couple of years. And so we have a growing knowledge base comparing these and a few interesting things I want to share. This first one on the left shows sort of a Venn diagram of works in OpenAlex that are also in Scopus and Web of Science. And you can see there's mostly congruity between Scopus and Web of Science. There's some that Scopus has it, Web of Science has it, and vice versa. But really, compared to what OpenAlex has, it's both of those are lacking quite a bit. And then this really cool ranking, the CWTS Open University ranking, recently switched from Web of Science data to OpenAlex, but they give you a dashboard so that you can compare. Really cool dashboard, but you sort of play around. So on this one, I think I did Australia, social science and humanities. And you can see that all of the universities are well above the line of where they would be if they had the same content in both. And most of that's driven by social science and humanities, not all of it, but quite a bit of it. This is a really cool dashboard. I can send you the link later so that you can play around with it, but it's also online at openlineranking.com. And then another example over here on the right just shows what if you took all of OpenAlex and just limited to what's in Scopus. So you got rid of all of the great things that are added over here on the left. Do you get the same results when you rank? And you can see it's a really tight correlation, except for a few smaller output entities. But really, you get basically the same thing, which is a really cool finding. Two more that are even more recent that just came out I'm really excited about. Over here on the left, you can see comparing journal coverage of open access journals. So on the left, this bar here represents all of the journals that are only in OpenAlex. And you can see there's about 25,000 of those. There's about 4,000 that are in all of the databases and much fewer that are just in Scopus or Web of Science. So really, a lot of the work that you're getting is open access. But interestingly, diving in underneath that, and this is something probably a lot of librarians already have suspected for a long time, you can see they've broken out higher and low income countries in the different databases. And then they've plotted against how biased they are. So if you're at 1 exactly, you're at the proportionate bias that you'd expect. But you can see in Scopus and Web of Science, both of these are disproportionately including higher income countries. And then lower income countries are not as included. Whereas OpenAlex here, you can see we're much closer to that unity. And then a final one over here on the right is the coverage of African journals in OpenAlex, Web of Science, Scopus, and AGEL. That's all I want to say on coverage. I don't want to spend too much time. There's a lot of great work out there. Really, the most important feature that's different in OpenAlex is that we're completely open. And that's a major feature. When I say we're open, I don't just mean you can go download a lot of the data. You can download the entirety of the database for free without even asking or signing up or getting any permission, and you can use it however you want. But our source code is also completely open under an MIT license. So everything that we do is open, probable. You can use it however you'd like. That's obviously very different than any of the ones you're used to. Some of the other limitations of working with closed SKGs, knowledge graphs, are the subscriptions are costly and they go up every year. I don't need to tell Library Crowd that. Any results based on these for science of science research or systematic reviews can't be shared openly because of licensing contracts. But also when universities and governments are making decisions based on these databases, they're not able to share them because of licensing constraints. So that's a downside. You inherit their exclusiveness. I talked a lot about some of the things that aren't in these other databases. So social science, humanities, performing, creative arts, business, law, regional content, other languages, things like that aren't getting in. And there's not really much you can do about that. It's not like you're able to add all of that somehow to your Scopus or your Scival instance and then be able to do analyses. You can, however, like I mentioned in that case study, limit things that you don't want in OpenAlex. So you can do sort of any section that you'd like. And then finally, you can't build off them. You have to buy another derivative product that does the specific thing. Yeah, I see Richard chiming in about licensing restrictions coming up. Yeah, it comes up quite a bit. And there's not really much that can be done there. The whole business model that currently exists in this space is metadata is the new oil. And if we sort of trickle and give you a little bit of metadata here and there at a high cost, then we make a lot of money off of it. We're trying to totally disrupt that to say metadata should be seen as the new water, openly available and as important to a healthy, thriving society as water. So we need to get the data out there and then value add on top of that, like products that are built on top of it, services, that's where the value should be derived. So thanks, Richard, for chiming in on that. Okay, just real quickly on how you can access OpenAlex. There's 3 ways. And the first one is the major differentiator. I sort of alluded to this earlier, but right now you can go on to AWS, Amazon, and download the entirety of our database for free. This is a very large database, And very few people have the ability to do much with it, but some people do. And there's a lot of cool things that you can do when you have the entirety of a database. But it's all there, so anyone can use it for whatever they'd like. And we update this every month. Because you're able to get the whole database, you're able to do all sorts of really cool science of science projects. Like we've got people who are going through and looking at the diffusion of research and knowledge throughout the world when there's trade agreements between countries and things that you can't do when you have a limited slice of the data. But again, most people can't do much with this. The next way you can access it, the one that I think personally is the most valuable and interesting, is our API, or application programming interface. It's completely open and well documented online. Without sort of subscribing or anything, you get 100,000 calls a day for free, which results in up to 20 million responses per day for free. So that's much more generous than even the paid versions of a lot of the other SKGs. We do have people that use quite a bit more. We open it completely free for academic users as well. But at a point, it becomes better on our servers if you just download the whole database, because we do have people who work on hundreds of millions of publications at a time. But still, this is not necessarily accessible. And when we built OpenAlex, we didn't want to make everything completely open as a snapshot and then say, that's it, we're done, it's open, if most people can't access it. So the third way that we've been working on a lot this year is through a graphic user interface. And anyone in the world can go to openalex.org and immediately start doing that. And I'm going to go into that in a moment. But something I do want to point out about this, we're proud of the graphic user interface, but it's always restricted in what it can do compared to the API. So I like to let people know anything that you see in our graphic user interface is a simple API call, but it's one that we think people do a lot. So we've made it that way, but you can do quite a bit more. Regardless of how you access it, the same sorts of ways people are using this. And I'm going to show a few examples of the types of analyses and then a few case studies. The general workflow is to come up with a logic layer over the database. You can go in and start looking at the 260 million works automatically. You don't have to have any sort of filters on there, but you can build a logic layer or a query with up to 51 different fields like country, institution, search terms, etc. And maybe you stop at the results and you're doing a systematic review and you just want to have all those publications. Great, there they are. Or maybe you want to do analytics on that result set. And that's what we call the stats, report, or group by section. And I'll go into some of these examples. A common one we get is how well are we progressing towards our open access goals? So as an example here, I use the filter institution, country, Canada, and open access, true or false, and then grouped by publication year. So you can see sort of over time, the rise of open access and not open access works in Canada. Canada's been investing a lot over the last few years in an open access strategy, and it's one of their main goals in their Chief Science Advisor's office. So you can see they finally surpassed the proportion that are open access over not. And then I put at the bottom what the API call looks like, just so you know sort of how simple that really is constructed. Another really common example is finding collaborators. And you can do this at the level of institution, you can do this at the level of authors, but the workflow is generally the same. So you find some area. In this case, I did gender equality work in medicine. And I leveraged the fact that gender equality is an SDG, or a UN Sustainable Development Goal, which we have in OpenAlex. I said, make sure it has SDG gender equality and also has a concept of medicine or family medicine, limit the country to New Zealand. And you'll see a limited author count 1 to 10. And I did that because there's some works now, especially in medicine, with thousands of authors, and that's not necessarily giving you great collaborative intelligence, but also just to show you that that's the kind of thing you can do. And then I grouped by institution, and you can see here the counts for the institutions that match that. Okay, benchmarking. This is another common use case that people are doing. So as an example here, how do countries compare in their publications relating to regenerative medicine? If you're not familiar with that term, that's sort of stem cell technologies and related fields. But I took advantage of the fact that that's also a concept, regenerative medicine, use that as a filter, source type journal. Here I put work type is not paratext, just to show you some of the increased flexibility. You can specify the types of work types that you want or don't want to include, the years, and then 5 countries, and just grouped by publication year. You can sort of see those trends over time. So these are some of the common ways that people are doing filters and group by to get these sort of analytics they want on research intelligence using OpenAlex. But I want to show you a couple of use cases of how different groups are using it currently, to just give you an idea of some of the different things that can be done. So the first one, this got a lot of news at the beginning of the year, but Sorbonne University canceled Web of Science, and they're using OpenAlex as a complete replacement. So they got rid of proprietary systems, and they're committing to only using open research information and all of their research and data systems. So for them, this is a complete replacement. For academic searching functions, for institutional reporting, and they've even built a research intelligence dashboard custom to their needs based on the API in OpenAlex. University of Washington is another example I like to show. They've built an international dashboard that showcases their research collaborations, and this is built off the OpenAlex API as well. I see those questions coming in. I'm going to get through a couple more of these, and then as we switch, I'll go to answer those. But please do continue to put your questions in the chat, because we're going to have plenty of time for interactive Q&A. Another great example that I like to talk about is Georgia Tech. In the US, they have a new strategy around supporting historically Black colleges and universities. And Georgia Tech sort of took the rein and created a tool that helps HBCU institutions find collaborators on specific topics near them. And this is all built off OpenAlex data. And I was at a conference where they were presenting, and someone asked, well, can't you do this with Web of Science? And he said, you know, we pay for Web of Science, and they wouldn't let us do this because the data is publicly exposed. And so we went to OpenAlex because we had to, and we stayed because we loved it. So this was one of those moments for me in the crowd where I was trying not to be too excited, but I was very excited inside. And then one of the more advanced use cases I like to show is EPFL in Switzerland, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. They've built all sorts of really cool custom dashboards. And one of the ones that I think is the most sophisticated, as you can see here, there's 6 different universities that they've looked at. And each of these sort of maps is a map of all of the research areas that they work on. If you zoom in, this is tens of thousands, I believe, of different research areas. But if you zoom out, it sort of shows you how similar these institutions are. So you can see the 2 in the top left, they see as competitors, where they do almost all the same work, and there's no real complementarity. Whereas on the right here, UNISG, you can see they have a lot of activity in areas that are absent from EPFL. And so they're doing these types of analyses to find who should be their collaborators. And I think this is a really great example. It does have a couple of these. I think I've put links to the YouTube video where they talk about these things. And then the final one I want to show, actually, I've got 2 more. VOS Viewer. So I think probably a lot of you in here have heard of VOS Viewer. Among libraries, it's really popular. I think it's the top bibliometric tool that's open source in the world. So people use it to understand bibliometric networks. In the past, the way you've had to use this is have your access to your database, download that, and then ingest it into VOS Viewer. All sorts of problems can happen during that. And so they're really excited because they're open and free as well to integrate with open and free data. So they built an integration into VOS Viewer. If you go to API requests and click OpenAlex, it's usually the default in there. You can go to the website, anything you build in the user interface, and copy and paste it into here, and it's going to automatically download that data and produce the visualization. It's just one of the great ways that happens, or one of the great things that happens when the data is open as well as the software. The last one I want to talk about is publishing workflows. So Kronos Hub, who's acquired by ACS, American Chemical Society, is using OpenAlex as the metadata sort of vein that goes through their publication workflow. All the way from pre-submission to peer review to acceptance and production reporting and repository, they're using OpenAlex data. And really excitingly, and we can talk in the Q&A if people are interested, there's this other piece of starting to send data to OpenAlex. I think the that's probably an interest in this group, but there is in the very near future going to be the opportunity for at scale contribution from institutional repositories and other sources of metadata curation. Okay, so that was a lot. I did want to say I'm going to send these slides around. A couple things to know, though. Contact us about anything at support@openalex.org. Whether you just want to tell us how great we are, whether you want to tell us how much you wish we had something that we don't, whether you want to set up a meeting or you found an error, that's a great place to do it. Great documentation at help.openalex.org. We do office hours, 1 hour a week where anyone can pop in. I don't think those hours are currently great for Australia and New Zealand, but if there is interest, I am happy piloting doing that for a little bit. If there's enough interest in this group, I'd be more than happy to start doing that. 4:35 are fine my time to do that, so I'd be happy to. Okay, and I'm going to go to openalex.org, but first I just want to quickly go through a couple questions came up in the chat.
Do you want us to read the questions out for you, Kyle?
That would be great. Yes, thank you.
The first one was from Jen and Kurt. So this was, are there plans to develop the public interface to have the functionality of the API? And the question was because it's rare for users to have the API skill sets and don't have that skill.
Yes, good question. So if any of you are following our listserv or our LinkedIn or anything like that, you'll notice that we're currently hiring a senior front-end developer. And the whole point of that is to develop a new user interface. The one that we've got now that I'm about to demonstrate is fantastic for almost all of the search and discovery use cases you'd want to do. But there's so much more you can do with APIs that we're learning from our users that we're going to be developing a more sophisticated sort of analytic one. But the other part of that I will say, and I'll go ahead and go into openalex.org right now. But anything you do in here, and I'll quickly do Simon Fraser University, and I'll explain all this in a minute, but anything you do, you'll see the URL updates automatically. If you go to show API query, it also shows you the API query that was used to make whatever you generated. And we intentionally are building this sort of interface so that people who are learning API for the first time can build their query in the user interface and then learn it with the API. So great question, thank you.
And then the second question we had was from Paula. And Paula asked, how does OpenAlex identify open access status? I think this is a question that was sparked from an earlier session today. I've noticed that some of our content that's free to download is marked as closed. Is this because it doesn't have a CC license?
Great question. I didn't mention this earlier, but OpenAlex is under the nonprofit OurResearch. And if you're familiar or not familiar with OurResearch, we are a nonprofit that advance open science solutions. One of them is Unsub, which you might have heard of. Another one that's really important around the world is Unpaywall. And I bring that up here because Unpaywall is really the industry standard of how you determine if something is open access. And the way that works is when a new work comes in, Unpaywall goes to the journal's website and tries to understand, is it openly available? Is there a PDF there? And if so, they mark, yes, it's accessible at source. If not, it's then going to go to, I think right now we have 30,000 repositories around the world that we're scanning to see if there's an open access version there that we can mark as green. And it sort of tries to reconcile those two to understand, is it in a repository, but it's at the site, then it's still gold. And then we, of course, can get some license information. If we can't, if we know that it's open access, but we can't find the license information, it's bronze. But if we can't, if it's marked as closed, but it is open access, that means that we weren't able to determine that it was open access. And some mistakes do happen, but the default for us is to say that something is closed until we've been able to find that. And historically, that's something that didn't change a lot. I think when open access first started, it was very much you're open or you're not. But now with things like bronze, they are changing and they're fluctuating. And that's something that we're still trying to figure out how we want to handle. I think what we don't want to happen, and everyone would agree, is that every time a publisher makes something open access immediately and then closes it, that we're tracking that change. But if you do see an error, report it at support@openalex.org. The first thing we do is try and understand, like, why was this one wrong? And is there something more systematic or is it just a one-off? But yeah, good question.
Great, thanks, Carl. Another one, this one's from Gemma. Does OpenAlex have an inclusion criteria for journals? So are there any checks for predatory publishing practices?
Fantastic question. Yeah, so I mentioned that some of these other SKGs are exclusionary. And the intention behind a lot of those is about, well, what they'll call quality. I think there's some room for argument as to whether or not that's always true, particularly being in a country where most of our works are not indexed in these data sets. But anyways, we don't have those criteria. And there's a good and a bad to that. The good part to that is you as a user get to decide what you want to include. The bad is that it's actually really challenging for most users to understand how to navigate the landscape of what is a predatory journal. And sometimes those change over time, and people have different agreements on that. The approach that we're taking in OpenAlex is to have everything in here. And then you as the user will be able to use filters that give you trust. So some librarians will use DOAJ as an example. So we have a filter that's whether or not something is indexed in DOAJ. Another one that people use a lot is CWTS. They're the, I think, the leading bibliometrics trusted group in the world. They've gone through OpenAlex data for their new open rankings and created a list of trusted sources, and you can filter out using just those. So you can do your analyses sort of doing any one of those. But one thing that I've heard that's super interesting that I hadn't anticipated at first is several universities are starting to use OpenAlex because they have a few journals that they've flagged as predatory that they specifically want to start understanding their behavior, and you can't do that if they're not included in these other databases. So yeah, great question.
Okay, I think this one's quite a technically specific one. So this is from Marzia. She's asking, need to find research outputs produced by a research center, but I couldn't do it in OpenAlex. Is there a way to conduct an affiliation search?
Yeah, great question. Okay. And I think this is the way to do it because we're in the user interface, so I can talk about a lot of these things. Right before I do that, I'm just going to go back to openalex.org and show you before I forget. It starts with a magic search bar. You can scroll down and find all of our documentation, the source codes here, where you can download the snapshot data, API, all of that. So if you need anything, it's there. You don't have to log in or sign in or authenticate. You do have the option to if you want to save things on our server, like a group of researchers or a group of journals that you're following, things like that. But from OpenAlex, you can just start typing anything. So I could type my name and bring up author profiles, or I could type Australia and look at the country. You can see all these other things are popping up. But regardless of, I mean, we might as well do New Zealand. Regardless of what you select here, it's going to bring you to the same user interface. And I'll go over the user interface in a minute, but specifically to your question on affiliations. So the way this works in here, I'm going to click over, let's use the University of Auckland. I'll get rid of New Zealand for now. All of the information we have on this is coming from ROR. So I'm going to open the ROR record for University of Auckland to show you sort of what we're getting. You can see a few child relationships have been added. So the New Zealand eScience Infrastructure Center. This is now something that we have in OpenAlex. And if there are specific centers that you think are really critical that be added, you can go onto ROR, search your university up here, and you'll see down at the bottom, suggest a change. So you can always add those. But even if it doesn't exist in here, you do have the option. It's usually only librarians that we profile this to, but you can search the raw affiliation string section. So UBC has the like Blusson quantum. I'm just trying to come up with one. Matter Institute. And it's finding all of the publications where someone used Blusson Quantum Matter Institute in the raw affiliation string. So you still can do that even if you haven't gone through and had those mapped in ROR. Yeah.
Okay, there's a beautifully off-topic question from Michelle, who's asked, what strategies is the Canada Chief Scientist using to promote open access?
Yeah, good question. So her mandate is all public. So I would Google it and you can look at it. I would say in Canada, we are focusing mostly, it seems, on open access as the most important part of open science. I obviously, as someone who works in open research information, would advocate that we need to be quite a bit broader than that. But the first round of this has had a lot of transformative agreements, which are already receiving a lot of critique. But there's also been in the federal science realm, not the universities, but the federal science, there's been a new repository and new ways of increasing green open access, which is really great. In Canada, we also have nonprofit publishers specific to the country, and we also have diamond journals as well. So all of those have been kind of in there. But yeah, I think a lot of the same things that other folks have been doing. What I haven't seen yet in Canada, and I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but I'm seeing it in other countries, is moving towards preprint servers being the default. So people are submitting things to a preprint server and then figuring out peer review and which journal they go to afterwards. A lot of funders, especially in the US, have started saying we're not paying article processing charges with our funds, and they've created servers. So Chan Zuckerberg, I think, was one of those. So that's another aspect people are doing that we're not really doing as much yet in Canada.
That is interesting. Yeah, I think if people want to chime in about preprint servers, please do in the chat. The next question was from M. That was, how can repositories do better with metadata and labeling to get coverage in OpenAlex? That had a lot of
Yes, great.
heart.
Yeah, good question. So the first thing to say is that right now, when we're going to a metadata for Unpaywall, we're just trying to understand if there is an open access version there. So we're looking for links to PDFs essentially. We're also looking for license information. So those are the two things we're really getting. Starting early next year, we're going to be piloting ingesting some institutional repositories in their entirety. There's some things we'll have to remove from it, but starting to get new records from institutional repositories when there's handles maybe, but not DOIs. And then in some cases, to get specific metadata that's been curated. We've seen some universities do a fantastic job curating the metadata in their institutional repositories, and they usually want us to be able to benefit from that. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email, and I should put my email in the chat as well, just so that we can make sure to keep in touch on that topic. But I would say anything that you do to increase the metadata quality in your repository moving forward is going to be a good thing. I think there was a while where repositories were being underutilized by the open science community. And I think in the next few years, that's going to have radically changed given how cheap and easy it is to go to all these different repositories. The challenge for us has been, in a lot of them, the data quality isn't always good enough for us to be able to work through. And so the more that you can do, the easier it is for other, and it's not just OpenAlex. If it works for OpenAlex, it works for OpenAir and all these other ones as well.
Okay, I've got two questions that are kind of technically focused again, so I'm going to bundle them together. One was around, this was from Max saying, there used to be a way to look at my institution and see what repositories our works were in via the web interface. This functionality is gone. Will it be reintroduced? And also then a second kind of related question around, are you keeping historical snapshots? So keeping track of changes over time.
Yes, both good questions. The first one on repositories was very confusing to people because it made it look like we were ingesting from your repository. Almost all of the situations where there was a repository record as the primary source came from Microsoft Academic Graph. And we're not currently doing that. Currently, once we have a work, then we're going to a repository to figure out if there's an open access version, but it has some other source. So for now, we've sort of taken the spotlight away from that feature. But when, like I said, early in next year, when we start ingesting directly from repositories, that will become a lot more prominent because then you will be able to, for instance, see which ones came in from my institution and which didn't. The second one on historical snapshots, yes, we do keep them. What we haven't figured out yet is how we make them accessible because it is very expensive on servers to be able to make a lot of them available. We just had a researcher who's trying to figure out because he wants to look at the evolution of OpenAlex over time, which I think is incredible. It's hard enough for me to even process one snapshot on my local computer, but to think of processing 10 in tandem to understand the evolution is really cool. But So right now, if you need one, you can email us, but just know that we can't give you all of them at one time because it ends up being expensive. But one of the things we're exploring, well, there's sort of two things that we're exploring. One is very soon we'll be starting to upload onto Zenodo, so there is a backup, and then you could have sort of different versions there. The second is that there's a few bibliometric community researchers who are coming together that want to create a supercharged OpenAlex for the bibliometric community. And one of the things they want to do is be able to have multiple snapshots available for researchers to come in, do their analyses, and export the results instead of having to do that. But none of those are available right now. So if you need it in the meantime, reach out.
Follow-up question, I think, from Marzia. She's asking, one of Scival's features is benchmarking using various metrics. Is this something OpenAlex would be able to do, especially with collaboration metrics and normalized citation metrics?
Yes, it is a really good question. I'm going to show you. So the way that we drive our development is when an institution tells us, I need feature X to get rid of my proprietary solution. We still listen when people have other, I saw some nice cheers there. We still listen to everything that you ask us, but we have a feature backlog that's around 2,000 features right now. And we're a team of 6 that are trying to create this really disruptive change in the market. So the way that we prioritize that is we need this to happen. One of the universities very recently told us, I need field-weighted citation impact. And right now, this is not very well profiled in the user interface. If I go to download my works, each one of these works will have a column that has all of these metrics. But just for an example, I'm going to show you if I click on any of these. This is an example of the user interface just having a small amount of what we have. So this is a record for one of my works. If I click on API here, you can see if I drag down, we have a lot of information about this specific work, but one of them is, for instance, field-weighted citation impact. We've got the APC price in there. We've got citation normalized percentiles, whether or not it's in the top 1% or top 10%. So you can see this one's in the top 10%, but not the top 1 because it's 97. So we have those right now. We're in initial conversations with Overton to figure out what we can do in the landscape of policy citations because we know that's so important to people. We've asked about things like Twitter, and most universities have said, well, we don't really know what to do with that anymore now that Twitter's collapsed and there's pay for like services and things like that. But policy citations we're hearing is important. So we're looking into that. That's a little more complicated because we're free and open and they're for profit, of course, but we're trying to work something out there. But I would say keep me posted on things like that when they're very important. I mentioned we are hiring a user developer to make a much more analytic platform. It's going to incorporate a lot of these pieces that are already in there, but we haven't yet surfaced in an easy way. But you can, for any of these, like I said, you can download, if I go back, you can download up to 100,000 results at a time as the CSV here. So for most universities, you can probably get, most of their metrics that way as well.
That's great. Thanks, Carl. We had a collective ooh in the room where you flipped to that. Follow a question from Paula regarding can Unpaywall interpret DC metadata, for example, DC:rights, free to read?
Yes, it can. And when it's done right, it's music to our ears because it makes it much easier for us to find the information. I don't have it handy, but we do have an Unpaywall support page that has exactly how we prefer to see it. But know that it doesn't have to be in the preferred format, but it is usually 100% right if you get it in that preferred format, and that is specifying the right DC fields. So great question. Thank you.
I'll give you a moment to pause and have a sip of water while we read this positive statement from M. Johnson. She was saying that harvesting institutional repositories in their entirety will be a hugely positive step towards supporting discovery and use of non-traditional works, not just green OA and self-archived manuscript versions that had 9 thumbs, 1 heart, and 1 like handshaky thing. So yeah, really positive. She then followed up just with a question around, I think it's a question around grey literature, commissioned public research, policy submissions, and etc. need to be counted. So I don't know if you want to make a comment about OpenAlex's approach to those.
Yes. So our goal is to be sort of, we're thinking of it as it's modeled after the Library of Alexandria, to have the, all of the world's knowledge in one place. But really, we've had to focus that on scholarly knowledge. And we've had to focus that for several reasons, but one of them is that that can just continue to expand forever and then no longer be useful to anyone if we try and replicate the internet, for instance. Overton has done a really fantastic job focusing specifically on these policy documents. And the approach they're taking is largely the one we're doing with academic works, where you go to some of these repositories and pull that information. They just go to public policy repositories instead of institutional ones. So at the moment, we're not going to try and replicate what Overton is doing. But as we do more repositories from institutions, we're starting to get more of that inadvertently. And then if you do have a repository that's really important, so I say as an example, somebody gave, there's a repository in Canada that has all of the student thesis and dissertations. Those are the type of repositories we can go to and get things immediately, even though they're not a university. There's one in the US that has a lot of policy papers that are on the border of being academic and sort of policy. Those we can go get pretty easily. But to your point on repositories, there will be some challenges. We want to be able to surface everything, but one institution we were working with, for instance, archives PDFs of web pages of their faculty members under certain situations. And that's obviously not something we're trying to make discoverable. So there will be a little bit of having to self-select, but I completely agree with you. I think that repositories have not had the moment they should have had for the open science movement. And I think the more we talk about transformative agreements, the more we sort of shove those repositories under the carpet, but we do need to surface those.
Okay, we have a question from Jen and I think, is it Curtis, also in the same room? They're asking specifically about field-weighted citation. How is it calculated and what are the topic allocations based on?
Excellent question. And I can show some of that in here. So field-weighted citation impact is a snowflake, I forget. It's one of those metric, which means that it's open and available and anyone can replicate. And it's actually a pretty simple calculation. It is not very complex, but essentially it compares a work that's published in a specific year, a specific document type, and a specific, in this case, ASJC subfield is what Scival uses when they do that. We've gone through and done the exact same thing, but there are some important differences. So we do have if you go to, I went to add something to report on, we have the defaults in there, but you'll see we have domain, we've got field, excuse me, and then we've got subfield, and these are in alphabetical to help you find them, subfield. Okay, when I go down, these three taxonomy pieces are actually from the same ASJC subfields. So these are the ASJC domains, the fields, and the subfields. Scival uses the subfields when they're calculating and normalizing for the field-weighted citation impact, and we did the same thing. But an important difference here, their ASJC subfields are determined by the journal they're published in. So if I publish a paper on a specific subfield, but it's in a journal that usually does a different subfield, it gets tagged as that. We very intentionally made this a work level attribute. So each work is classified by the work that it is itself. So you might have a work in OpenAlex that gets classified into a different subfield than Scival, for instance. And I know some bibliometricians have already started looking into this because in some cases, there are journals that are really well confined to the ASJC subfields. They almost never diverge from the three that they told Elsevier. But then there are some where those ASJ subfields are not even in the top ones that we would classify them as. So you start to get some really interesting dynamics there. The last piece I'll say on that is on the work type. We used all the same ones as them. We played around with including data sets, but what we found is some universities are doing a really great job with their data standard and some are not at all, their data set sharing. And it completely skews the field-weighted citation impact at the level of an institution even, which shouldn't be possible. But there are some data sets that are so highly cited and most get 0 that for now we've decided to leave out data sets. But in the future, I'm looking forward to including those as well.
So we go from the specific to the very general now. Is the OpenAlex business model dependent on grant funding? Do you have a diversity of funding sources? And that's from Michelle.
Yeah, great question. So OurResearch, the nonprofit that is running OpenAlex, has been around about 13 years. And the general model for the products is data is free, but time and services cost money. And that's the model that's going to continue for the sustainability of OpenAlex. But it was really critical that we got this grant from the Arcadia Fund in the UK to help us create OpenAlex. And that was a 5-year grant for them. We're more than halfway done the first year now. But the way that model is working is that each year we get slightly less money from them, or I guess maybe you're looking the other way, but we get slightly less money from them, and our expected revenue with OpenAlex is meant to displace that, so that by year 4 of the grant, we're completely sustainable. Even though it's 5-year, we gave ourselves some buffer. And like I said, all of this is completely open and free, and 99% of the users of OpenAlex will never pay anything. But there are some universities that are starting to pay for our services and our time. So some universities need, kind of like Scival has, where there's a customer consultant that helps do training and answer questions. Some want us to help build dashboards. Some want us to do custom curation or their own machine learning classifier for specific taxonomies. Basically, anything you can imagine are the types of things that we'll then do on contract or through a premium subscription that then help make OpenAlex sustainable for everyone. So I hope that answered it.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. There's a question from Marzia. Marzia, it'd be great if you put which institution you work at in the chat, because it would be kind of cool to have a look at your dashboard. But they have developed a self-service dashboard for researchers to view all of their research outputs and metrics, and they're pulling data from Scival and Scopus. The sources for publications and author IDs are from Elements, our publication management software. Is it possible to link OpenAlex to our dataset and use OpenAlex APIs to collect metrics instead of using Scival? Over to you.
The short answer is yes, it should be. The longer answer is I haven't yet seen anyone implement that, but there is a group of institutions in the US that are currently doing this type of evaluation, where they've got a CRIS system that's either pure or you mentioned Elements, and they want to start feeding it with OpenAlex data. So they're piloting that now. As soon as one is open and live, I'm really looking forward to sharing that. I should also say that there are open CRISs like Viva that there is already a prototype that allows you to feed with OpenAlex. But the part about that I find so interesting is a lot of institutions, when they're buying these CRIS systems, are also paying for additional curation in those data sets. But those data sets then are just becoming better quality for that product. We've had our first 2 institutions reach out asking if they could take what they're paying Elsevier to do their curation to curate specifically for OpenAlex. And the benefit there is that it benefits everyone in the world. Scopus can come get the data if they would like it. Elements can come get the data if they would like it. And so can anyone else in the world. So that's the model shift that I think is going to be really exciting in the next year or so, is how much of these CRIS system will start being fed specifically by this.
That's lovely. Thank you, Kyle. I think we've got to the end of the questions in the chat. There was some discussion around DOIs and that Crossref is better than DataCite, but I don't think that was a question. So I think if people can join me in thanking Kyle for his time and his energy.
Yes, thank you for having. This was great conversation, and please do follow up with me. I'm really happy to continue these conversations.
Thank you. And Kyle has put his email address in the chat very generously. Thank you, Kyle. And Namihi, thank you everyone for joining us. Our next session is at 2 o'clock, and that's about open access initiatives in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you. Ka kite, matewa.